I asked 7 billionaires what the secret to their success was.
And what did they say?
All of them said the same thing. Get out of my mansion.
Are you developing IoT solutions? Get ready for tomorrow with Farnell, supporting your design journey from connecting smart sensors to the cloud to implementing AI. Find everything you need at farnell.com. Enjoy this episode with Farnell, a global distributor of electronic products and solutions.
That was marvellous, Pete.
I bet you've missed it. To be fair, I didn't really spend much time looking for one for today. Sorry, folks.
So pretty much like every other week.
Welcome back.
Yeah.
Welcome back. We've not been on the air. If that's how is it really on the air?
It's not really on the air, is it?
No.
It's more sort of cables under the sea and satellites these days.
Yeah, we've not been under the sea for several weeks now. In fact, it might even be getting on for a month. But there's been reasons for that, hasn't there?
It has. So welcome to the Constant Geekery podcast. It's lovely to be back with you all. And the reason for our long absence is an outbreak of COVID here. So I blame Erin, who's not here today to defend herself. So that may seem a little unfair, which is why I'm going to continue to blame Erin.
I think it's fair to just blame Erin, generally. Any problems in your life? It's Erin.
Yeah.
I mean, did you see her cardigan in that video you released on the main channel the other day?
I try not to watch anything that's got Erin in it.
No, probably wise.
Obviously, then, I have had the COVIDs. I no longer have the COVIDs, but I do have still the dodgy throat.
You do have a bit of gravelly voice. It's quite cool, actually. You should stick with that.
Thanks.
You sound like Bryan Adams singing.
I also decided to have a nice luxuriant COVID beard as well. So
yeah, I wouldn't say it's quite luxuriant yet. It is getting that way.
No, I sort of decided halfway through. So
it looks like my front lawn at the moment.
Thanks for that, mate.
That's all right.
Welcome everybody. And if you're new to the channel and if you're a recent subscriber, thank you very much. If you haven't subscribed to our podcast channel yet, then what are you playing at? Go on, give that button a tickle. Show your support for our hard work. We've got our main topic today. This is going to be a slightly shorter podcast. We're actually recording this on a Thursday which is not our usual day.
Because we're just getting back into it.
Getting back into it.
You've had COVID. I've been away. I was doing some work out in North America for a client for our digital agency. Yeah. And that was quite intense. Very interesting. Very good fun, but quite intense. So I've been out of action for that. You've also had a bit of a holiday break, I think, as well, at some point. But then I got COVID. So it's all kind of smushed together. But it is really good to be back. So a shorter episode today.
Shorter episode. And we're going to pose a bit of a question, and this is probably the one that will end up on the thumbnail. But talking about the M2, if you can only upgrade one thing on the M2 MacBook Air, so you can either upgrade the RAM, so you can go from 8 to 16 gig, or you can upgrade that slower 256 SSD to 512, but stick with 8 gig. So which is the best thing to do? So don't answer yet. Okay. We'll come to that. And if you're of the persuasion where you literally cannot wait for the answer, then we'll put some timestamps in the description for you.
Yeah, but we'll get to it quickly enough.
We will. So some other things as well with the podcast. What we found is our working pattern has changed a little bit over the last year, particularly with things kind of returning to full steam after COVID. So we're struggling to manage to fit a weekly podcast into our schedule. So rather than make it a pressured thing, where we're always kind of stretching ourselves, what we thought we'd do is switch to a fortnightly podcast.
Yes.
Yeah.
That should take the pressure off, and I think it will probably help the quality as well. Not that the quality was suffering, but we felt that could become an eventual outcome of the pressure.
Absolutely. So that'll be the plan moving forward. We are already in August, and this, I think, is episode 16 of the year. So it's not like we're doing them every week anyway.
No, it's not.
So I think it's just better for us to have a schedule that's a bit easier to stick to.
Definitely.
So anyway, as is our norm, are there any news stories for us to consider?
Just a couple, and we're only going to touch on these briefly. One of the things that I spotted was it's a week or two ago now, but it's something we want to come back to on the podcast, is the Google engineer Blake, I think it's Lemone is how you pronounce his surname, but apologies if I got that wrong. he came out a few months ago. He's an AI engineer, and he's been testing LaMDA, which is one of the conversational AIs that Google's been developing. And he came out with statements saying that he believed LaMDA to be self-aware, so sentient. And Google said, no, that's not the case. And he's published various transcripts of his conversations with LaMDA, which are quite compelling and interesting. But ultimately, he's been sacked. And the details around that are a little bit muddy. But it is something I'd like to explore in an upcoming podcast. Possibly the next podcast we do is AI. And is it actually going to replace us? Because we've talked about, the AI improvements in things like phones. And cinematography, that kind of thing. We've got a video coming out on that, and we've talked about things like DALL-E and Midjourney, or that's what we'd like to talk about. So, if that's something you think will be interesting to see your comments and questions ahead of that podcast.
Yeah, that will be an interesting topic to consider.
Yeah, and then the other thing that caught my eye is Microsoft Teams. For those of you that know Microsoft Teams, you know that it's
Rubbish.
I don't think it's rubbish. I think a lot of people say that it's pretty good, but it does have its moments.
It's from my perspective, I use it mainly for video calling, and I was video calling with our finance director this week, and it just kept dropping audio, and this is quite normal for Teams call. The usual process for us when we start a Teams call is that we get so far into the Teams call before someone will then say, shall we move over to Zoom?
That is true.
We then indeed move to Zoom and don't have any problems after that. That
is true. So Teams is an alternative to Zoom, but it's more than an alternative to Zoom because it is a messaging app as well. So if you're familiar with something like Slack, it has some of those features in it as well. So it does get a bit of hate, but actually, on the whole, I think it's been quite useful for our business, despite those things. Anyway, the news is that Microsoft have finally announced that they're bringing native support for Apple Silicon to Teams. And I'll be interested to see if that resolves some of the issues that we've been seeing.
It does suck the battery at the moment.
Even on an M-chipped machine. So, yeah.
Very nice.
We'll wait and see and report back on that, perhaps do a bit of testing.
Yeah. And you will have spotted, of course, or heard the jingle at the start of the podcast. So very kindly, Farnell have sponsored our podcast for a few episodes.
Yeah, thanks for that.
And we just wanted to talk about a couple of the things. I mean, I found this absolutely incredible looking at I've always been aware of Farnell as a company, but actually the range of stuff that they sell.
It's staggering.
It is absolutely amazing.
If you are a geek, if you like your electronics, your engineering, that kind of thing, it's amazing.
And I've been looking at 3D printing this week.
Have you?
Yeah. And I looked on their website earlier, and there are 65 different models of 3D printer that they hold in stock.
Right. That's a lot of printers.
Yeah. And I just think 3D printing is something I desperately want to have a go at, but it's having space to have a 3D printer, but I'm wondering if we can maybe find space in here. I know Erin is dead keen to make stuff, but the problem is, if we get a 3D printer, Erin will make little ducks or other things just to annoy me.
That is the case.
Yeah.
She definitely will. But don't you need to be a 3D expert in things like SolidWorks or what have you to be able to do 3D printing?
No, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of designs that are available for different things on places like Thingiverse and other open source websites. So, you can make interesting things, tools for around the home, interesting gadgets. Some people, they're just making figurines that they paint, and
that's so cool.
I think back to when we had inkjet printers when they first came out. And we went from dot matrix to inkjet, and I remember being absolutely astonished at the quality that was coming out of the printer and that level of excitement. And then there was always then that kind of thought of, well, could it print solid? Could we have a solid printer one day?
Really?
I can remember thinking
that?
about that as a youngster, and I think it's such an exciting thing that is now a possibility. And it opens up journeys for youngsters as well, I think, especially those who are interested in inventing products, because you're able to prototype stuff. And last time we did the Farnell sponsored episode, we were talking about things like Raspberry Pi. And, you know, if you're working with stuff like that and you're making tech tools, I think we talked about, you know, the possibility of making your own video camera surveillance system on, you know, all sorts of interesting projects you can do. Or, you know, perhaps you're making a video server for your TV, your media center, those kind of things. And you can make your own cases and boxes to keep it all tidy and neat. And I just think that's really cool. Actually,
you mentioned cases, and that brings something to mind, the video I watched the other day, which I'll touch on in a minute. But you're right, it is cool. When I was a kid, I know you were into your model railways, and so was I when I was a kid. And I can remember making things out of balsa wood that you couldn't buy to add to your layout. And I made a little barge once out of balsa wood. Well, a 3D printer, you could make that so realistic.
Yeah, you could. I was thinking as well, you know, again, going back to the last time we had the Farnell episode, I think it was with Erin, and we were talking about, do you remember the biometric login system that we made?
Yes.
Before fingerprint readers were very common.
Were a thing.
Yeah. And we had to have a case made for it, which we actually had a local machinist do. Yeah, and they machined it out of aluminium, which looked amazing. But I remember that process being quite difficult. And how much easier would it have been if we would have been able to knock up prototypes in resin?
Absolutely. A little known fact about me is I started out my life as an engineer, an electronics engineer in an electronics company. And it was production engineering. So my job was to make sure that the production of the electronics, when electronics were made in the UK, this is, you know, I didn't do this out in the Far East, was to make sure that the production of those was as efficient as possible and high quality, that kind of thing, all sorts of different things. And I remember one challenge that we had was we had this big, expensive, I think it was a thyristor. So it's three-legged component, quite a big thing, that the technicians were having to bend the legs on to fit into this piece of electronics that they work in. I think it was a radio modem at the time. This was in the 90s, so quite a sophisticated bit of equipment.
So the 1890s.
And the legs on the thyristor had a tendency to break, or it was fiddling. It was taking a lot of time to get it right. And in the end, I made a tool that you could slot this thyristor on, because it had a little circle in it that you could sort of use it, put a spigot in to hold it in place, and then you could bend it in one motion consistently every time. But even that simple tool took me the best part of a day to make. Literally, I hand-made it. And then eventually, once we proved that it worked, we got the engineering division of the business to machine it, much like you were just describing. That would have been an hour's work to 3D print it, including designing it, because that's just how easy it is. So it does open up all sorts of amazing possibilities. Yeah,
it's an interesting thing, and I'd be quite interested to get a 3D printer in at some point and watch Erin try and do stuff with it. I mean, I'm interested in getting any kind of tech in and seeing Erin struggle with it.
Do you know what? I think I'm forming an idea here. So the video I watched was, I can't remember the name of the YouTube channel, so apologies for this. Maybe we put it in the link if I remember, Tom. But first generation AirPod case, the batteries die on them. And unsurprisingly, you can't replace the battery. So if you phone up Apple, they say, we'll just send you a replacement one because it's not economically viable to replace it.
Nice and in line with their environmental credentials.
Yeah, because I'm sure people are sending them back to Apple to properly recycle, and they're not ending up in landfill. That was sarcasm, by the way. Anyway, the video was fascinating because basically what this guy did was he took the internal parts out of the case, which is destructive. They're glued and clipped in a way that you cannot extract them without it. Put a new battery on, which you can get replacements for. And he actually fashioned, he made his own USB-C charger, which is impressive. But the key point is he designed and then manufactured a 3D printed case. And initially he did it with filament. It was a bit rough. And then he did it with a resin 3D printer, which I think Farnell do as well. And it looked absolutely fantastic. So it opens up right to repair options and all that kind of stuff that before just wouldn't really have been feasible. And he's put that case as open source. So I wonder if we set Erin the challenge of repairing some iPod cases.
Interesting. It's a nice idea. Well, let us know if you'd like to see that. Of course, you'd like to see it, but let us know.
And maybe another Erin challenge, although she's better at taking things apart, as we know from the video she did on the main channel with the iPhone. But maybe get her a framework to put together, framework laptop.
Yeah, I'd be quite interested to see her wrestle with one of those as well. Maybe that's a subject for another day.
Definitely.
But yeah, 3D printing, it's an exciting area. And if it's something that you're interested in, then there's a link to Farnell in the description. They stock everything that you need to get going with 3D printing.
Have fun.
Yeah. Let's get to our main topic, or the first of our two main topics, because I actually just want to talk a little bit about the fallout on YouTube from the discovery and publication of M2's flaws. But
hang on, Apple products don't have flaws.
We'll come back to that.
Do they?
We'll come back to that. So at the outset, I posed a question to you, Pete. So if you go and buy, let's stick with the M2 MacBook Air, okay? Now in the UK, that's 1,250 quid.
Mm-hmm.
And
quid means pounds, by the way. English pounds.
Coin of the realm. Yes, 1,249 of them to be specific.
In some parts of the UK, it's still sold in groats.
You get that laptop. It comes with 8 gigabytes of RAM, which many people would say is insufficient for an Ultrabook in 2022. And when I say some people, that would include me.
Mm-hmm.
And it then also comes with a 256 gigabyte SSD. And some people would say that is insufficient for an Ultrabook at this price point in 2022. By some people, I mean me.
Okay.
So obviously, unless you're completely oblivious to what's going on with Apple, there was a discovery that Apple had started using one 256 gig NAND chip instead of two 128 gigabyte NAND chips. So it means that the SSD in the entry-level MacBook is not running in parallel, so it's really quite a bit slower than the previous generation. Now, I just want to caveat this before we get to the question. And that is that the previous generation M1s, of course, did come with the two 128s. Is there any guarantee that the M1 MacBook Air that is still in production will remain having two 128 gig chips, or are they going to switch that to 1256 as well?
No, there's no guarantee, because we know that Apple, as many companies are having to do at the moment, are looking to rationalise their production lines because of chip shortages and things like that. So there's every possibility they could do this.
And we've got some on order. I can't remember if it's 4 or 5 of these things we've got on order, and they're not coming until the 20th of August, and we ordered them weeks ago.
Right.
And what actually happened was when the M2 got released, suddenly M1 MacBook Air was out of stock everywhere. Like on the same day, all the Apple stores in the country suddenly didn't have any stock of the M1 MacBook Air, and even resellers, suddenly didn't have any.
That's suspicious.
It is suspicious, isn't it? Why would they do that if not to force people into purchasing the M2 MacBook Air? It's it's all well and good saying, oh, well, the M1 is still available. And then, of course, everyone on YouTube is saying, get the M1 because, it's such good value and in a lot of cases it's quicker.
Well, I do know Tim Cook listens to the podcast, so maybe he listened to our recommendations about getting the M1 and made arrangements.
Perhaps he did. I'm sure that happened.
Yeah.
I just thought that's an interesting point. So when those new laptops come, I will take the back off of one of them. And
will you?
I will. And just see how many NAND chips are in there. And we will report back. But it wouldn't surprise me if that's what happened.
That could be NAND Gate.
Yeah. I mean, it's a frustrating thing because when you've got a laptop like this, so let's go back to our M2 MacBook Air. You've got 8 gigs of RAM, you've got a 256 gig SSD that's slower than the previous generation.
Yep.
In a laptop that relies quite heavily on swap memory.
Yep.
Now, just to be clear, all computers do memory swapping.
They do.
On all operating systems, that is a thing. It has been for
Decades.
Yeah, it's always been a thing. And the idea is that if you've got a block of memory that's in use but not actively being used because you're doing something else, that block of memory could just be written out temporarily to the hard disk, to the SSD, and it can be copied back when it's needed again. And that just frees up memory space. So Apple computers are doing that. They're also using memory compression and various other things to make efficient use of the memory. They also do something called file caching as well. And this is why when you look at Activity Monitor on your Mac and you might only have a couple of apps running, it will seem like it's using a lot of memory. Well, actually, what's happening is the operating system is caching files to speed things up, and it will just free up that memory when it needs to.
It's very clever.
It is. So there's lots of stuff going on under the hood. And the key thing you've got to remember with the M chips, of course, is that they are systems on chip, which means that you've got your CPU and you've got your GPU sharing the RAM. And the idea behind that is that they can share the same address space, which massively speeds up because you're not copying RAM from one place to another. But it's also true that the GPU needs its own area of memory that's dedicated to it. Is going to need some space, and the CPU also has space that's dedicated to it. You've also got those machine learning cores and various other things which presumably are also making use of the memory.
I would think.
So it doesn't take a lot for that 8 gigabytes to suddenly not really be enough and to induce swap behavior. Very easy to get an 8 gigabyte M1 Mac to swap. I haven't personally played with the M2, but it'll be just as easy to get it into swap. And once you do get it into swap, if you've got that smaller SSD, it's going to be slow.
Yeah.
And therefore, various tests that involve disk writing or memory swapping will be slower on the M2 than they were on the previous generation M1. So the question is, you can only upgrade one thing. Each upgrade is £200. So you can upgrade the 8 gigs to 16 gigs for £200. Or you can upgrade the 256 to the faster 512 drive for £200. You've got an extra £200. You've got 1,449 English credits to spend on your M2 MacBook Air. So which spec is the better spec? Is it better to have the faster SSD so that when it swaps, it's much quicker? Or is it better to have more memory so that there is less swapping?
Okay, so just to be full disclosure, we haven't discussed this. This is a fresh question. I knew the question was coming, but that's all. I've not done any research. I've listened to what you've said. And if I had to do it right now, I would go for the 16 gig of RAM.
Interesting.
And the reason for that is that that's where the system is going to go to first to hold things. And as you mentioned, the GPU and the CPU need a certain amount of space to do certain things. So my feeling is that although, yes, you're right, the 512 gig SSD is quicker, and that an 8 gig of RAM machine could make use of that, my gut is the 16 gig of RAM and stick with the slower NAND drive. Am I wrong?
No, that is the correct answer. In almost all scenarios, it will be faster. There are some where once it starts heavily writing, so if you've got a workflow that involves on heavy disk writing, then the faster SSD will win. But for most computing tasks, having the extra memory is what you need. Now, I've explained this before for the M1, but let me just do it again so that folks understand that going from 8 gigs in this kind of shared memory environment up to 16 gigs is more than just doubling the memory in real world. So take a fictitious example, okay, where our CPU is accessing 4 gigs of the memory space, and the GPU has got reserved another 4 gigs of the memory space for doing whatever it's doing. Perhaps you're playing a game or rendering something. If you go up to 16 gigs, the GPU is still reserving 4 gigs for that task, but now the system has 3 times as much available memory, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because the CPU now has access to 12 gigabytes instead of 4. And I'm grossly simplifying to give you an idea of what actually happens in the real world, and that 16 gigs gives you a lot more than you might be thinking. And we have always on this channel recommended, if you're buying M1, buy the 16 gig model, because it is a lot better. We've done quite a lot of testing with that.
We have.
To prove that point. If you're going to push your laptop in any way, if you're doing photography, you're doing any kind of creative workflow, you're better off having additional RAM, even if you can't afford to upgrade the SSD.
There you go.
So
I was right.
you were right.
Wow. There's a first time for everything.
But let's just talk about the fallout from these various revelations that have come to light. I mean, fairly early on, and the channel Max Tech, which some of you I know watch, and I watch quite a bit of their content. I think Max and Vadim are basically good guys, but they have absolutely hammered this topic. And they're doing that for a reason. They're trying to make a business out of YouTube, and I can tell you it's hard to make money on YouTube.
It is, and YouTube force you to behave in a certain way if you want to achieve that.
They do, and Max Tech are playing the game, and lots of other people have played the game. That's the way the game is played. If you want to be successful on YouTube, you have to play by their rules, and that's part of the reason why 2 years on or whatever, our channel is still quite small, because we don't tend to play those games.
No, we just do what we do, and you take it or leave it, YouTube.
Yeah, and that's because this isn't our income. It's not our main focus. It's something that we do for the love of it, really, and also it provides training for youngsters as well. So that's what our video project is.
I think the reality is that you just enjoy sitting talking with me, don't you? That's the love that you refer to.
Yes, Pete.
Yeah, okay.
That's definitely what it is.
Awkward. Right, okay.
So Max Tech were the first to report on the slow SSD and the fact that there was only one NAND chip, I believe. They also then reported on the thermal issues. And the way this got received, there's a lot of YouTubers that got up in arms about the way that they were approaching it.
And can I just say, before we discuss that, even though they were playing the YouTube game, I have to congratulate them.
Oh, for sure.
Because it was really useful advice. And actually, you could say the YouTube game of repeat, essentially, means that useful advice for consumers got to as many people as possible.
Yeah, and it worked for Max Tech as well. So congratulations, Max Tech, on reaching 1 million subs. Well done. You absolutely deserved it. You've worked really hard, guys, and we appreciate what you're doing. I'm not going to name any names, but YouTubers come out of the woodwork then to rubbish what Max Tech are doing, because their feeling is, you get a lot of arguments like, no one's going to use a MacBook Air in this way. This is not the target audience. Why are you doing all these tests where you're pushing it to the absolute limit? And that is a fair argument. However, go and look at the product page on Apple's website for the M2 MacBook Air. It is not focused on students doing basic college work. It has benchmarks for creative apps like Final Cut Pro, like Premiere, like After Effects. And they're bigging up all of the abilities, like the video abilities of the 8K encoder or decoder that's on the chip. And
so what you're saying is they're positioning it for that market.
But of course they did. They when they released it at WWDC, it wasn't like, you can type a mean Word document on this new MacBook Air. That's not the way Apple has sold this device.
But you can. You really can.
You definitely can do that. So yeah, absolutely. If you're buying a MacBook Air to use it as a MacBook Air should be used, there's nothing wrong with the M2 MacBook Air, and it's a fantastic computer. You'll really enjoy it. However, if you're aware, like, it's this whole the M1 iPad saga again. You're aware you've got this amazing chip inside of your iPad that you actually can't tap into. I wouldn't want to be in that position with a laptop where I've got this amazing new chip, but I can't quite get to all of the performance because I haven't got enough memory and the swap's really slow, or because it's thermal throttling, because I'm pushing it too hard. So yeah, let's just... MaxTech, we're talking about the thermal throttling. I mean, this thing goes much hotter than the M1.
Yeah.
It goes up to about 108 degrees, and then it will start throttling. And if you're pushing the MacBook Air hard, it will hit that temperature relatively quickly on a
There's no
heavyweight
fans to cool it.
Right. So it'll have to drop the voltage, it'll drop the amount of power the chip's consuming and throttle the performance in order to keep the temperatures under control. And MaxTech reported on this. So we get a YouTuber then, who shall remain nameless, who was quite vociferous in his response on Twitter, rubbishing what the hardware that MaxTech had done, and trying to demonstrate that his MacBook Air didn't have any problems. And he had this picture of his MacBook Air running Cinebench R23 benchmark, and he had one of these apps in the menu bar that shows temperature and fan speed.
Yeah.
And the fans were spinning. I don't remember the exact figures, but, a few thousand RPM, in other words, spinning. Mm-hmm. And the temperature said something like 39 degrees. And so Vadim's responding to this guy on Twitter, being incredibly polite. You're very well restrained. And pointing out, you can't run Cinebench R23 and have a CPU at 39 degrees.
It's just known to cook the CPU, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm sat here now. I've got a fan app running. My CPU is currently at 41 degrees.
And the studio is cool.
Studio's cool, and all I've got is OneNote running. The laptop's doing nothing. That's just kind of where it's at. And the fans are definitely not on. And the fans don't come on until it gets considerably hotter than that.
Yeah.
So it was obvious to anybody who's actually done some testing that was a nonsense result that this guy's posting. And so he points this out and says, your app is wrong, and you need to maybe try something like TG Pro. So this guy gets TG Pro, and sure enough, 108 degrees. That's where his CPU's at with the fans blowing. But he wasn't very gracious in defeat, I got to say. And it's not a good look.
This is part of and I deploy the air quotes when I say this, the game of social media in general, not so much YouTube, is that no one can be gracious, can they? You have to have these polarized views to get the clicks, to get the furore, and that's disappointing. It's so divisive. It doesn't need to be like that.
But I just think it's sad. I mean, there were some high-profile YouTuber who has a history of releasing leak bomb videos. Who was trying to call MaxTech out on their use of their, I wouldn't say clickbaity thumbnails, but thumbnails to get the message across and get the clicks in.
Was it a bit ironic that they were doing that?
They made these guys, honestly, they just made themselves look a little bit silly, I think. And I get this sometimes, where you release a video. In fact, we did the watch strap review. Actually, we did it ages and ages ago, but we put the video up last week. Somebody made a comment about how, your QVC. I've been.
we should do a mock QVC episode.
We should. I can't remember the exact way that he put it.
Oh, I've got to look that up.
But I'd succumb to the lure of the sponsor or something like that, and it's just like you're having a laugh. Or it takes more than a couple of watch straps to get me excited. But
it really does. I've never seen him excited.
And I've forgotten the point that I was going to make now with regard to that. But on YouTube, you release content, and there's always people to detract from your hard work. You're actually looking it up.
I want to see the comment now.
You're such a scumbag, honestly. You're going to read it out for the audience.
Keep going.
Well, you need to.
Yeah, no, you keep talking. I'm going to find it while you talk.
This is not good content.
I used to really like this channel, but it's getting more and more like watching QVC. Sad when a decent channel gets seduced by its sponsors.
Seduced. Just to be clear, that wasn't a sponsor. And there we go. People will always assume bad motives, or a small demographic will always assume bad motives for what you're doing, and you just got to ignore that and get on with the job. For all of the guys calling out MaxTech, I think there's a bit of envy or jealousy in it, because those guys, they went out, put their necks on the block, they ordered all the different specifications out of their own pocket, and Those are not machines that they're then returning.
No.
They've actually given one away.
And they're not being given them by Apple, so they have to say nice things. So you're getting objective analysis.
Yeah, I think so. And look, if you don't want to watch every video that a channel makes, you don't have to watch.
Well, I don't. You just see my YouTube. I subscribe to a lot of channels, and there are videos that I watch, videos I don't. I follow. There's a guy out in the States who does an amazing. It's called Living the Van Life, and he's a cinematographer by trade, and so his videos are absolutely exquisitely shot. They're beautiful. He gets sponsored for certain things, but that doesn't detract from the quality of the channel. But I don't watch every video because some of them just don't interest me.
Right, and this is the point, because I quite often, you'll get these comments where you post up a piece of content that somebody doesn't jive with. They're not interested. Well, okay, you might not be interested in watch straps, but I am. I'm a watch geek, and I love watches, and sometimes I do indulge myself on the channel, and I do stuff that interests me. But I think might also interest others. And I know it's not going to be a super stellar popular video, but that doesn't matter. But what I don't understand is then you get these folks who get upset about it and then maybe unsubscribe from the channel because you've released a video that didn't. It's like, it's a good job that didn't exist with TV, isn't it?
Yeah.
Back in the day, it's just like you don't expect the TV channel to put out every piece of content that you want to watch.
I know you're not a Star Trek fan. Okay, and I know you mock it, but I am a big Star Trek fan, and I have been right back to the original series. But what you will find, even real die-hard Star Trek fans, which I'm not, but I do really like it, when you have an episode of very well-crafted television, in my opinion, you will then inevitably get what are called filler episodes that aren't quite up to scratch. And, you might say, that one wasn't really for me. But it doesn't mean that you stop liking Star Trek if that's your thing, or whatever series it is. That is just hard. It's hard to output top quality every week, and you can't always make the content, even if it is top quality, appeal to everyone all the time. I'm pretty sure there's a saying about pleasing all of the people all the time.
I think there may well be. And I think the same principle is true as well if you get something like Max Tech where they're reporting on a great issue, but maybe their style of reporting or the frequency of the reporting and content doesn't appeal to you. That's fine. I don't sit and watch every video they put out, but I do watch the ones that I think will be of interest to get the key points out, and I think the work they do is good. And sometimes you just need to apply that filter and be gracious. I don't
be gracious. That's the key.
Within YouTube, I'm discovering that tech is actually a really difficult niche. I mean, YouTube don't even acknowledge that tech exists. Whenever you get the creator surveys, it's like, which category do you fall in? And there is no category for tech.
You're in the pancake category, aren't you? That's the closest we could find. Pancakes and syrup.
It's annoying.
Yeah.
So we need to support each other as creators rather than be shouting down other people's work. And
the audience needs to be supporting it as well. So not just the YouTubers, but comments like, "Oh, you've turned into QVC" or that kind of thing aren't really fair. That this is hard work, and if you've not ever tried to work a YouTube channel, funnily enough, I tried my own separately to this, and I've just taken it down because I put out what I thought was very well-produced content. It was interesting, but it got very little traction, and it is hard work. So to anyone who's got any kind of traction on YouTube, including yourself on the main channel, don't sneer at that if you're an audience member, because what will happen is you'll lose that content, even if some of it's not for you. So you're doing yourself a disservice.
Yeah, and I didn't want this to come across like a rant. I was more interested in the way that people had responded to Max Tech's videos. But you do raise a valid point. You think about somebody who think about your favorite content creators, or your smaller favorite content creators. Not necessarily us, but there's plenty out there. Pete was pointing to himself and saying, "Me, if you're just not watching us on YouTube and
which
listening."
You should be, by the way, which is youtube.com/The Constant Geekery podcast.
But think about it from the creator's point of view. I've looked at all of the money that I've had in from the channel. So I do earn ad revenue, earn Amazon revenue and other stuff. Now, I don't do memberships and Patreon, and I don't push merch massively or anything like that. So even with all of that and sponsorships, the few that I've done, the net result is that I'm running this channel at a massive financial loss. And so that you would ask, well, why would you do that? Well, in our case, partially it's a bit of a creative outlet, and I enjoy it. Enjoy sharing information. I enjoy looking at new products. It's been a vehicle for Tom, who's sat behind the camera, my son there, who's been editing. He'll be editing this podcast today, so he's learned a trade and a skill. Erin is learning a trade and a skill, so we're helping others. And that I find interesting. But for the majority of people,
it's also, just to say, it's also equipped us with skills that we can transfer to other parts of our life.
Oh, absolutely, yes, definitely. And for the average creator, though, who's trying to make YouTube a career, you couldn't live on it. It's just, I don't, you need to get that audience or you fail. And there's this desperate need as well. And I think a lot of the ire that got directed at Max Tech was because they beat everybody. They got all of the laptops in. They did not muck about. They got on with the job, worked all night. They got some video content out first. And as soon as that happens, everyone else is behind the times or still waiting for their delivery.
Bit of envy creeps in.
Yeah, possibly. And a lot of smaller creators are going out and spending large amounts of money to get kit to review on the channel. And there seems to be an expectation of that. I quite frequently get comments saying, are you going to get this laptop or that? And it's like, well, not if I don't need it for my business. No, I'm not going to go out and buy a £1,200 laptop just to test it for you. For what you want, you go and buy it and test it.
Yeah,
it's we do what we can and we share what we can. But so just think about that with your small creators. So if you don't give them your support, they will inevitably, they're already fighting an uphill battle.
Yeah, they'll wither and fail.
They can't take a holiday because YouTube will kill their channel. They're absolutely up against it all the time. So support creators.
Definitely.
And that's a rewarding thing as well, to be part of a community. I mean, I've been watching Max Tech since they were quite a small channel, so it's been interesting to see them grow, and it's always nice to be involved with that.
Yeah, well done.
That's probably enough talking about that, and I think that's probably enough talking about M2 for now. So the next sort of Mac content that we'll be putting out will be when we get those M1 MacBook Airs.
Yeah, we'll do a teardown.
I'm still waiting as well. In fact, I got a little plan. Anna, if you're listening, I happen to know that you might have acquired a new toy because I've been watching your Twitters, and I wonder if you might be able to do a couple of tests for me. If so, so if you don't mind doing that, drop me an email. That'd be great.
Yeah, that'd be good, Anna.
I would like to. There's something that hasn't been tested yet that needs to be tested. I haven't seen any other channel do it. So we'll maybe do that. Then, of course, we've got the releases that we might be expecting coming in autumn.
In the fall.
And perhaps those could form part of some kind of rumour mill action. Yeah. Because we haven't got any rumours for you today.
Not this week. No,
sorry, folks.
No. Again, been out of the loop. Other than the non-rumour that you mentioned, which is we're moving to a fortnightly schedule for now. But yeah.
So in our next episode, we'll maybe, as part of the rumour mill, just talk about some of the things we might be expecting to see later in the year from Apple, and consider whether or not we might end up with any of that kit.
Maybe.
Who knows?
Maybe not. We'll have to wait and see.
I've been quite gratified, actually, that because I did the video about the M2 pricing and how if you do more than one upgrade, you're basically into M1 Pro territory.
Yeah.
And you may as well get an M1 Pro, especially as Amazon is still selling it for less than the price of an upgraded M2.
Definitely.
And it's been quite gratifying, actually, to see a lot of people have done that. And I've had quite a few comments back and messages from folks saying thanks very much. And they've gone and got the 14-inch and they're very pleased. And so you should be. It's
a great laptop.
If you don't need the super portable chassis,
Air.
yeah, then the 14 inches, the much, much better machine.
And actually, it's not that heavy anyway. I took mine with me when I was in Canada a few weeks ago, and I was at no point thinking, this is a beast. All-day battery life. It was great.
Yeah, they are great machines. Anyway, I think we should probably wrap things up.
We should.
I'm feeling a little hoarse. There's a joke there.
Leave it alone. Leave it alone.
And I hope you enjoyed this little bit of chatter. And if you're not subscribed already, please subscribe.
Yeah.
Please also visit the main channel. Just search Constant Geekery on YouTube. You'll find us. Show Erin a little bit of love on her latest video. She did a video with the headphones.
Yeah.
And she does work hard on.
She does work hard
occasionally.
She's got no friends, and it's all quite sad, really. So that's why we never are unkind to her, because she's sensitive.
I think on that note, we'd better say cheerio, folks.
Thanks for watching.
Bye, everyone.
Cheerio.
This episode was brought to you by Farnell, your global distributor of electronic components, products, and solutions. Visit farnell.com.